This is the chapter Torteau, and it begins on page 78. Grandmère was silent for a few seconds. She was looking into the air like she could see it all happening again right in front of her. Now I understood why she'd never talked about this before. It was too hard for her. Torteau's family hid me for 2 years in that barn, she continued slowly, even though it was so dangerous for them. We were literally surrounded by Germans, and the French police had a large headquarters in the town. But every day I thanked my Maker for the barn that was my home, and the food that Torteau managed to bring me, even when there was hardly any food to go around. People were starving in those days, Julian, and yet they fed me. It was a kindness that I will never forget. It is always brave to be kind, but in those days, such kindness could cost you your life. Grandmère started to get teary-eyed at this point. She took my hand. The last time I saw Torteau was about 2 months before the liberation. He had brought me some soup. It wasn't even soup. It was water with a little bit of bread and onions in it. We had both lost so much weight. I was in rags. So much for my pretty clothes. Even so, we managed to laugh. Torteau and I, we just laughed about things that happened in our school, even though I couldn't go there anymore, of course. Torteau went every day, and at night he would tell me everything that he had learned so that I could stay smart. He would tell me about all my old friends too and how they were doing. They all still ignored him, of course, and he never revealed to any of them that I was still alive. No one could know. No one could be trusted. But Torteau was an excellent narrator, and he even made me laugh a lot. He could do wonderful imitations, and he even had funny nicknames for all of my friends. Imagine that, Torteau was making fun of them. I had no idea you were so mischievous, I told him. All those years you were probably laughing at me behind my back too. Laughing at you? He said. Never. I had a crush on you. I never laughed at you. Besides, I only laughed at the kids who made fun of me. You never made fun of me. You simply ignored me. I called you Torteau. And so? Everyone called me that. I really don't mind. I like crabs. Oh, Torteau, I am so ashamed, I answered, and I remember I covered my face with both of my hands. At this point, Grandmère covered her face with her hands. Although her fingers were bent with arthritis now, I could see her veins. I pictured her young hands covering her young face so many years ago. Torteau took my hand with his own hands, she continued, slowly removing her hands from her face, and he held my hands for a few seconds. I was 14 years old then, and never had I kissed a boy. But he kissed me that day, Julian. Grandmère closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. After he kissed me, I said to him, I don't want to call you Torteau anymore. What is your name? Grandmère opened her eyes and looked at me. Can you guess what he said? She asked. I raised my eyebrows as if to say, no, how would I know? Then she closed her eyes again and smiled. He said, my name is Julian. This chapter is called Julian and begins on page 81. Oh my God, I cried. That's why you named Dad Julian? Even though everyone calls him Jules, that was his name. Oui, she said, nodding. And I'm named after Dad, I said. So I'm named after this kid? That is so cool. She smiled and ran her fingers through her hair, but she didn't say anything. Then I remembered her saying, the last time I saw Torteau. So what happened to him? I asked. To Julian. Almost instantaneously, tears rolled down Grandmère's cheeks. The Germans took him, she said, that same day. He was on his way to school. They were making another sweep of the village that morning, By now, Germany was losing the war, and they knew it. But, I said, he wasn't even Jewish. They took him because he was crippled, she said in between sobs. I'm sorry. I know you told me that word is a bad word, but I don't know another word in English. He was an invalid, and that's why they took him. He was not perfect. She practically spat out the word. They took all the imperfects from the village that day. It was a purge. The gypsies, the shoemaker's son, who was simple, and Julian, my torteau. They put him in a cart with the others. And then he was put on a train to Drancy, and from there to Auschwitz like my mother. We heard later that someone who saw him there before they sent him to the gas chambers. Just like that, poof, he was gone. My savior, my little Julian. She stopped to wipe her eyes with her handkerchief and then drank the rest of her wine. His parents were devastated, of course. Mr. Bumier and Madame Bumier, she continued. We didn't find out he was dead until after the liberation, but we knew. We knew. She dabbed her eyes. I lived with them for another year after the war. They treated me like a daughter. They were the ones who helped track down Papa, although it took some time to find him. So much chaos in those days. When Papa finally was able to return to Paris, I went to live with him. But I always visited the Bumers. Even when they were very old, I never forgot the kindness they showed me. She sighed. She had finished her story. Grand-mère, I said after a few minutes, that's like the saddest thing I've ever heard. I didn't even know you were in the war. I mean, Dad's never talked about any of this. She shrugged. I think it's very possible that I never told your father this story, she said. I don't like to talk about sad things, you know. In some ways, I'm still the frivolous girl I used to be. But when I heard you talking about that little boy in your school, I could not help but think of Torteau, of how afraid I had once been, and how badly we had treated him because of his deformity. Those children had been so mean to him, Julian. It breaks my heart to think of it. When she said that, I don't know, something just really broke inside of me. Completely unexpected. I looked down, and all of a sudden, I started to cry. And when I say I started to cry, I don't mean a few tears rolling down my cheeks. I mean like full-scale, snot-filled crying. Julian, she said softly. I shook my head and covered my face with my hands. I was terrible, Grand-mère, I whispered. I was so mean to Auggie. I'm so sorry, Grand-mère. Julian, she said again, look at me. No. Look at me, mon cher. She took my face in her hands and forced me to look at her. I felt so embarrassed. I really couldn't look her in the eyes. Suddenly, that word that Mr. Tushman had used, the word that everyone kept trying to force on me, came to me like a shout. Remorse. Yeah, there it was, the word in all its glory. Remorse. I was shaking with remorse. I was crying with remorse. Julian, said Grand-mère, we all make mistakes, mon cher. No, you don't understand, I answered. It wasn't just one mistake. I was those kids who were mean to Torteau. I was the bully, Grand-mère. It was me. She nodded. I called him a freak. I laughed behind his back. I left mean notes, I screamed. Mom kept making excuses for why I did that stuff, but there weren't any excuses. I just did it. And I don't even know why. I don't even know. I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak. Grand-mère stroked my head and hugged me. Julian, she said softly, You are so young. The things you did, you know they were not right, but that does not mean you are not capable of doing right. It only means that you chose to do wrong. This is what I mean when I say you made a mistake. It was the same with me. I made a mistake with Torteau. But the good thing about life, Julian, she continued, is that we can fix our mistakes sometimes. We learn from them. We get better. I never made a mistake like the one I made with Torteau again, not with anyone in my life. And I have had a very, very long life. You will learn from your mistake too. You must promise yourself that you will never behave like that with anyone else again. One mistake does not define you, Julian. Do you understand me? You must simply act better next time. I nodded, but I still cried for a long, long time after that.